Using an attack dog, Israeli women soldiers forced Palestinian women to strip during a raid on occupied Hebron. These are your girl boss soldiers that are on TikTok. Netanyahu has ordered a plan to remove all of the country's African migrants.
He was like, matter of fact, how'd you get in?
Your family lives here, your school is here, your relatives are here. Now just imagine if you couldn't access any of that. That's how basic the rights are that are being denied to us. We are not allowed to move freely in the places that we are from. It's a checkpoint here. If there was an outpost here, if there were settlers here, and you have to navigate all of the most important physical locations in your life by a constant maze of 21st century settler colonialism. That's what our lives are like because of Zionism. Who demonetized us?
Instagram.
Were we even close to making any money on Instagram?
No, that's why it has been such a financial hit.
Hello and welcome to episode 103 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we break down the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world and bring you stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of supporting the Palestinian struggle for decolonization, justice, and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara E. You might know me from Instagram as @GazanGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B.
What's up, y'all? Mikey B on TikTok, Michael Schertzer on Instagram, and you can call me Mikey Intifada if your neighbor is such a hot Palestinian that you felt the need to buy pepper spray because you are a cold ass bitch.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But before we do, please like, comment, subscribe if you hang out with us on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast app, subscribe and leave a review. As always, you can find our full episodes and sources on PalestinePod.com. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, reach out to us at PalestinePod@gmail.com and give us a follow on Instagram @ThePalestinePod. Find us also on Patreon, where you get early access to the Palestine Pod episodes and additional podcasts per week. It's called the Patreon Pod. It's a little more laid back. We talk politics, Palestine, pop culture, and get a little more personal. We're also hosting our monthly Zoom happy hours with our Patreon subscribers only. So really exciting stuff. Check us out on patreon.com/PalestinePod. So let's get into it. You want to start off with the Indiana University anti-Palestinian racist?
Certainly. So this girl by the name of Haley Toach, she made like a get ready with me today video. And she's, drinking coffee and like applying her makeup. And usually people who do these type of videos, they're like, I had a fruit smoothie today. They're like, I am going to go on a 8-mile run and I inspire positivity. But this girl is like putting on her makeup and then telling a story about how there's a Palestinian man who lives in her building on her floor who came to introduce himself as a new neighbor. The roommate of this girl was like interested in this guy, right? She described him as good looking and charming and friendly. And then through conversation after he leaves, the fact that he's from Palestine gets brought up, right? And it's this girl who is Jewish and a Zionist, and it's her reaction to this information that makes this all super crazy, because just by the mere fact of mentioning Palestine, she immediately spews racist and very dangerous tropes. She talks about buying pepper spray to like protect herself, despite the fact that he has presented no threat at all, and actually the roommate is interested in him.
She's telling the story and she goes, this guy comes over and he seems like totally normal, and she's like angry, and she goes, and he like comes over to introduce himself and says like, hi, I'm your new neighbor, I just wanted to say hello. Like she's like saying, like everything he's saying is totally normal and very pleasant and kind, and the way she's retelling the story makes it sound like it's the most atrocious thing in the world. But even more than that, she goes to her friend, she goes, do you know what that means, that he's from Palestine? And her friend's like, no. And she goes, well, that means he probably wants to kill me. That's what she said. That means he probably wants to kill me. And it's like,
right.
The problem with this, of course, is that she is spewing deeply, deeply racist anti-Palestinian tropes that are so dehumanizing. A guy comes over to introduce himself and say, hi, I live down the hall. And because you find out that this guy is Palestinian, your immediate reaction is that he must want to kill you. Where does that come from? You're not the victim in this. He's the victim in this because he's the one whose family has been displaced from Palestine. He's the one whose family is not allowed to go back to Palestine. He's the one who's probably the grandson of Nakba survivors. He's the one who doesn't have freedom and equal rights on his land. You are someone who I don't even know whether she has any connection to the occupation or not. So then, like, the conflation is even more confusing because is she even a Zionist? Is she an Israeli American? Or is she just a Jewish person who immediately perceives the existence of a Palestinian person in her vicinity as a threat, which is
I
even
would
more
say
confusing, right?
all
Because
three
there's
options are not great.
right,
Right? There's no option where she comes out looking like a reasonable human being. She's deeply disturbed.
right,
And that's what we talk about when we talk about Zionism is affecting people's mental. It's affecting the way that they think. And it also connects to what we were saying on the last episode, where it's like, you're not supposed to do Zionism out loud. Ben Gavir's main downfall will be that he talked too much, that he spoke too much, and then there will be a record. She had the same type of thing where these things that she said on camera are spoken about regularly in various circles, right?
right.
And so all she did was expose a quiet conversation to a larger audience. There's no way she gets to think like this if this is the first time she's ever had these thoughts. These thoughts are deeply ingrained because she may or may not have any connection to the occupation, but she grew up in a Jewish family that supports Zionism.
For sure,
And
because
so
that
it
is clear Zionist that's clear Zionist ideology that she's spewing. And this reminds me of when I was in Palestine, when I was at the Holocaust Museum, and when I saw Jewish American students there on birthright in the Holocaust Museum in Palestine, and they were being walked through with soldiers. And they were, I've told this story before, they were the only group that had soldiers with them visiting the museum. And I went to the front desk and I inquired, I said, "Hi, I'm a tourist from America. And I just noticed that this group is walking around with security, armed soldiers. So I'm just wondering, like, can we have security too?" And they looked at me like puzzled. "Oh, you don't need that." And I was like, "Well, they have it, so why don't we need it? You know, obviously, like, there's some danger here. We should also have security." That's exactly what it's for. They want them to feel unsafe. You're the only ones that need it because you're Jewish students. And because you're Jewish, your life is constantly at risk and you're being targeted. And there's terrorists everywhere that are just trying to kill you and they just want you dead. That is the message that is being sent and being indoctrinated into them from a very young age.
it's also about privilege and supremacy, right? Because you're the only one with an armed militia, the only one that's moving through the museum with a hired gun at the
Literally.
Holocaust Museum. No less. Like, how do you not combust from irony?
But
Like,
that's the thing too, is like they take something which is obviously very emotional and they're going to be going through it and watching something which is understandably extremely emotional and extremely traumatic, and then they combine that with this ideology that your life is still at risk today and that what happened then is related to what's happening now when it's not. So it's very twisted the way that they do that, but it's very intentional. These army escorts are very typical in the occupation and they start from a very young age. My friend who's Israeli American, whose family left the occupation and went back to the US, told me that they had that for their school field trips when they were 5 years old in kindergarten, you know, and they would go to like the zoo or something. All of this to say that this sentiment that your life is in danger because a Palestinian person wants you dead is the foundation of Zionism. Zionism can't exist without pointing to an imagined threat, because that's not what this is about. This is about Palestinians having rights on their land and what happens to a people when they've been literally suffocating for the last 75 plus years. And when you deprive them of their humanity and you deprive them of their rights, what then can they do? And how these people actually live, what their day-to-day life looks like. I'm literally wearing a shirt that says "Right to Movement" because some Palestinians got together and were like, hey, our cause is going to be that Palestinians should be able to move in their land. Like, that's how basic the rights are that are being denied to us. We are not allowed to move freely in the places that we are from. So just think, marinate on that for a second. Like, you are from Anytown, USA. Your family lives here. Your school is here. Your relatives are here. Now, just imagine if you couldn't access any of that. If there was a wall here,
Yeah.
if there was a checkpoint here, if there was an outpost here, if there were settlers here, and you have to navigate all of the most important physical locations in your life by a constant maze of 21st century settler colonialism. That's what our lives are like because of Zionism. So no, Haley, you don't get to say that, oh, this Palestinian neighbor that lives down the hall from me, now I get to buy pepper spray and he wants to kill me. That's not what this is about. Go to him and ask him what his family has been through because of Zionism. If you even
Yeah.
have the courage to do that. I saw she deleted the post.
Of
She
course.
deleted the video. I don't know what's
She
happened.
privated her account.
I don't
She's
know if
likely
Indiana University is like got involved. They probably don't give a shit, to be honest,
well, TikTok has been flooded
I
by
know.
a lot of people commenting her name, and she started trending. I think they're gonna have to address it, and what'll happen is you'll get, like, probably the ADL or somebody to step in. Also, it's kind of a pivot in messaging for them, right? Because at first, they were like, "Palestinians don't exist," right?
Yeah.
And
But that's what they
and you can't
always do. But
hold up. You cannot be like, "Yo, a thing that never existed, that's a threat," right? So, they had to acknowledge that Palestinians exist, right? The Arabs are a threat is what it's like it has been a shift in their messaging
it's
because
not Michael, it's
they
not a shift. They just say that all of those
they
things at
say
the
all the
same
things.
time.
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
say all those things at the same time,
They
and then when
confuse.
somebody
Yeah,
calls them out on it, they just go back to the other thing, right?
yeah.
So just you get
They like to move goalposts is what they like to do.
yeah, that was the name of one of our first episodes, if you remember.
I remember because I upload.
You don't remember all the names of all of them.
No, that's true.
Occupation soldiers who forced a group of Palestinian women to strip and walk around them in a circle under threat of releasing attack dogs, because that's what the occupation does. So if Haley's listening, just try to understand what it means to be a Palestinian living on your land. Occupation soldiers forced a group of Palestinian women to strip and walk around them in a circle under threat of releasing attack dogs.
It's a part of a larger trend of both forcibly policing women who wear hijab. It's happening in France as well, where women have been turned away from schools. LAPD has ripped the hijab off women previously. The occupation soldiers engaged in a extremely heinous display of sexual violence.
Everything. It's violent, it's sexual violence, it's colonial violence,
Yes.
it's all of that. So according to the Haaretz, using an attack dog, Israeli women soldiers forced Palestinian women to strip during a raid on occupied Hebron. 5 female family members were forced to undress while threatened by a dog from the canine unit and the soldiers' rifles. Israeli women soldiers. So these are your girl boss soldiers that are on TikTok. 2 masked Israeli women soldiers with rifles and an attack dog forced 5 female members of a Palestinian family to strip naked, each one separately in the West Bank city of Hebron in July. The soldiers threatened to release the dog if the women did not comply. During the raid on the family's home, male soldiers searched the male family members but did not require them to take off their clothes. The children who were in the home were screaming in fear the entire time. The soldiers were told to pull the dog back because the children were afraid of it. You know what's weird?
That whole thing.
The whole thing. But you know what's weird about the story is that they say that they searched the male family members and they didn't make them strip. They made the women strip. It shows you that the pretext was not that they were there to carry out a search for whatever it was. They were there to humiliate the women. Right?
Yeah.
Because if they were there to search, which by the way, even that we can challenge the premise that an occupying power has the right to enter with violence a house of the people that it's occupying. That's another subject. We of course challenge that premise. But let's assume that their premise is legitimate. It's not, but let's assume. Why make the women undress and not the men? Purely to harass and humiliate the women. And also to humiliate the men, because we come from a traditional culture where when you do that to women, it's humiliating also for the men of the family. And they know this. They know what our cultural values are. They know what our traditions are. They know what our culture is because they stole it. So they had to learn it in order to steal it, right? It's a really gross story. I can't imagine what it's like for those children that were in that house. Apparently there was like 25 to 30 soldiers that were stationed in and around the house and the neighboring apartments, which is an insane amount of soldiers. It reminds me of when we had Roat on the show and she was telling me, "Oh, I remember my childhood was great and it was loving and I came from a great family, but then there were moments where I realized that like something was really off, like when the soldiers would point their rifles at us when we'd be walking down the street and we were just kids. It reminds me of that because I'm like, each one of those children now, because of that incident, has been deeply traumatized and they'll remember that for their entire life. But the soldiers go about their business doing this every single night. And they don't even think about the PTSD that they're creating in the moment.
Yeah, and it's because they hate Islam as well. It's like Islamophobia actualized through state violence,
Yes, yes,
right?
there's an Islamophobia element, of course, but like it doesn't help to be Palestinian Christian. You don't get treated better. So I
No, I
don't,
know.
yeah,
But
so I
I'm saying,
don't,
like, they saw these I'm not trying to say Palestinian Christian women get treated any better, right? Shireen Abu Akleh is a Palestinian Christian, but I'm just saying, like, they made the women who dress traditionally, who dress
yes.
modestly, undress because there is a deep hatred for the religion and the people.
According to Beit Salim, they have recorded about 20 such cases of women being forced to strip naked during occupation army raids on their homes, but they believe that such phenomena at rifle point have increased in recent months, and most of the women refuse to be interviewed by reporters about the trauma, of course, because it's deeply humiliating, and they would rather be silent about it than actually put their names or faces out into the world as somebody who had to go through this ordeal. We'll never really know the true scope of who is subject to this practice, but it just goes to show that Zionist aggression takes new forms all the time. It's never the same thing. Actually, it's actually a joke amongst Palestinians. Like we laugh about the new ways that they find to torture us, you know? Like remember that video um, of the family that was told that they had to leave their house because the Zionists were going to bulldoze the whole thing, and like the grandma's like in the corner, like on a hospital bed. Remember that video? When I just remember discussing that like amongst Palestinian friends, and just the casual way with which we like refer to these deeply traumatic events because we're like, did you hear like this new thing that they did? Like the woman was in a hospital bed. Like that's new for them. Like she's like hooked up to an IV and she's like shriveled in a corner and they're like the whole thing's going down. It's like
A former head of Mossad who acknowledged the growing consensus that it's an apartheid system. He said, "There is an apartheid state here in a territory where two people are judged under two legal systems. This is an apartheid state." His name is Tamir Pardo. He was appointed head of Mossad in 2011 by Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu has been prime minister forever. He also warned that what has been described as Israel's forever occupation actually threatens the existence as a Jewish state. Israel needs to decide what it wants, he said. A country that has no border has no boundaries. Former Speaker of Parliament, the occupation's parliament, Avraham Berg, and the historian Benny Morris are among more than 2,000 Israeli and American public figures who have signed a recent public statement declaring that Palestinians live under apartheid regime.
so how many Israelis is it going to take before admitting that it's apartheid before the apartheid regime crumbles? Because like at some point there's like a tipping point. Like when you get almost every Israeli to agree, right? Like it's got to be over.
We're not anywhere near there.
Yeah, but so what's the number is what I want to know. Like, is it a
Yeah.
third? Is it a third? Maybe is it a half? Like,
What I know is that, like, we keep reading these stories about more and more people inside the occupation understanding that it's an occupation and that, like, they're culpable. And even there was that guy who was like, hey, everybody should leave, right? There was that former, like, maybe head of Shin Bet, and he was like, "Yeah, no, everybody should literally just go move in with their relatives in Florida. Like, we fucked it up, guys. Wrap it up." Now I feel like you have more prominent people coming out saying that, but it's so silly that we keep reporting on that. In one way, it's hopeful, right? Because you want the South Africans to be like, yeah, we're a part of apartheid. Like, we're sorry. Like, here's what we can do to fix it. But also it's like, why do we care what South Africans have to say about apartheid? Like, who wants to hear from Nazis about how badly they feel? Who cares what the architects of apartheid have to say about apartheid
Yeah,
that they are a
but
part of?
when we refer to South Africans, we're talking about the victims of apartheid.
You wouldn't want to hear from an Afrikaner, right,
Right.
about like
Correct.
apartheid, right? You
Correct.
wouldn't want to hear from a Nazi about the Holocaust. You
Correct.
wouldn't want to hear about a system of apartheid and occupation from an Israeli,
Right. So you're
right?
saying, why do we even care if the architects are like saying what it is? Well,
Yeah.
I think it's because they're still doing it. And we're
Yeah.
hopeful that if at some point they are like, well, the gig is up or the jig is up or whatever,
Whatever
um,
that phrase is,
yeah, whatever
whatever
that
I
is,
look up and cut in.
you would hope that that growing consensus will translate into actual
Yeah.
dismantlement.
It's that
That's
thing where
why
it's like
we
you can't
care.
say the quiet part out loud, right? You're not supposed to say, you know, our rights are more important than our right to movement is more important than their right to movement, because that is actually something that you have on your South African apartheid bingo card. From the elder Mossad heads to the youngest of, communist organizers, there's a group of children who have called themselves the Youth Against Dictatorship. And they are more intense than the previous refuseniks who burned their occupation service letters. These are people who explain that they comprise the anti-occupation bloc at the weekly demonstrations you've seen against judicial overhaul. And these are younger men, women, and non-binary folks that are about to be conscripted into military service, and they do not support it. Just another instance of the cracks are showing. People at the highest levels confirming that it's apartheid. We've got people who are about to be boots on the ground who are refusing service and using the terminology of occupation. A lot of upheaval
A lot
in
of
that
upheaval, but
society.
also like not enough upheaval.
Yes. Well, they put the evil in upheaval. So
So, yeah. I mean, because, I don't want to make it sound like it's a majority because it's not.
no, it's definitely not a majority. Everybody hates these kids. Everybody is
Everybody
gonna
hates them.
tell everybody is gonna say that this doesn't represent like what people think about stuff. And they're like, they wanna let people know that they are proudly and openly fascist, and that they will like chant death to Arabs in the street. They'll promise another Nakba. Like, they will let you know that they are fervently fascist. And that's why they are going to buy pepper spray, because they have an attractive neighbor. The occupation has been murdering Eritrean people. Eritrean regime agents persecute asylum seekers inside the occupation. There were riots recently among Eritrean asylum seekers.
According to reports, there was alleged infighting between groups of supporters and opponents of the Eritrean regime in Tel Aviv. And in response, the leader of the apartheid regime, Netanyahu, had said that he wants to deport all Eritrean asylum seekers, which, is very on brand for the leader of an apartheid regime. He was like, you know what? You're going to go. All of you are going to go instantly. I think
He
it's,
was like, matter of fact, how'd you get in?
Right. AP has said that Netanyahu has ordered a plan to remove all of the country's African migrants. All of the country's African migrants. That's more than just like a few dozen Eritreans fighting in like a square in Tel Aviv. And
Kind of a tall order.
it kind of just goes to show that maybe what we were saying about this being a white supremacist regime after all is like true. Anyway, go ahead.
Maybe they shouldn't be like, but what about black Jews anymore?
Exactly. They're like, can't we have an apartheid regime if it's to protect black Jews? Because then in that sense, it's like actually like socially progressive.
They're
No.
like, okay, check this out. Okay, check this out. We stole land and killed people, Palestinians, for this land, right? And it's for black Jews, but also the black Jews gotta go. All of them.
All of them.
And then you're like, wait, if you subtract Palestinians,
And then
add black Jews,
and
then subtract black Jews, that leaves
a handful.
what?
It leaves just the white.
What does that leave? What does it leave? Netanyahu. He's like, it's the most racist math.
It's horrible. It just always ends with white supremacists. Like the answer is white supremacists. You don't have to look very far to find like just a history of really shitty things that the apartheid regime has done to black Jews. I mean, it's not
this
hard.
Week alone.
Just Google like Israel black Jews and like just see what happens.
Let's see what does happen actually.
Okay.
The first thing that comes up for me is the Anti-Defamation League. Extremist sects within the Black Hebrew Israelite movement, 2020.
Okay. The first thing I get is Black Hebrews in Israel face threat of deportation.
That is my second hit. And that's from 2023.
Click on the news tab, okay?
Okay.
It's like shitty news after shitty news after shitty news.
After decades of struggle in Israel, dozens of African Hebrew Israelites faced deportation 1 month ago.
Yeah, next thing. Israeli racism against Jews on display again. Captured black soldiers saga highlights racism in Israel. Israel nominated a quote-unquote proud racist to a prominent position. What do I tell my black Jewish children?
I guess pack up your stuff because you're going to Africa.
You know what's weird that doesn't come up? I have to like search for this intentionally, even though it should be the first thing that comes. I mean, it should be one of the major things that comes up, but it doesn't come up unless you aggressively search for it. And then you find like a Forbes article about it is, you know, the whole Israel forcibly injected African immigrants with birth control and sterilized them against their will, without their consent, without their knowledge.
You disagree with eugenics, then actually you're wrong, apparently. And yeah, those were Ethiopian Jewish women who were sterilized by the occupation. You can Google Ethiopian women sterilized.
Yeah, and they admitted it in the Haaretz. It's been reported on by super mainstream media like Salon and Washington Post and Forbes. So take your pick. These are not normal things, and this is just illustrative of the fact that the occupation is not a normal society.
Yeah. Hey, who spearheaded sterilization as a official policy? Who did that?
We can Google that as well.
Who did that? I feel we'll get demonetized if we say.
I don't know if we're even. Are we monetized?
We actually got demonetized already.
I think we're not monetized. If we are monetized, I don't even know about it. Who demonetized us?
Instagram.
Okay. Were we even close to making any money on Instagram?
No, that's why it has been such a financial hit. We've gone from making $0 to also making $0. Folks, that's been another episode of the Palestine Pod. Thank you all so much for watching, listening, however you consume it. Check out our full episodes at www.palestinepod.com and follow us on Instagram at @thepalestinepod. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com. Look for us on Patreon, www.patreon.com/PalestinePod. That's been another episode of the Palestine Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day.